Okay, can everyone see the screen okay? Okay, just want to make sure. All right. Okay, so we're going to start on chapter 7, and it gets into, we talked in the last chapter about some little reports. We talked about FI cards and the kind of the one-page pre-printed forms, and you'll have some of those with DUI and for traffic crashes as well. We typically don't like to call it traffic accident because a lot of times it's not an accident. It's someone that runs a red light or speeds or is on their cell phone. So it is better to be referred to as a collision or a crash because that's realistically what it is. But we're going to talk about traffic summons or ticket, depending if you're on the East Coast or West Coast, and then crash reports. And then of course, we'll go over our writing assignment, which is our DUI report. So something a little bit different this time. So it is important for us to understand the importance of traffic enforcement because there's a lot more to it. You can actually make a lot of good arrests off of traffic stops. And typically really good what we call hustler officers that are ones that are out there kind of doing, looking for criminals and doing a lot of proactive enforcement, if you will, that you can find a lot of good stuff on traffic stops because people tend to move things from point A to point B for traffic. So just kind of keep that in mind. So working traffic isn't a bad thing. Understand that each state is a little bit different, just like we've been kind of talking about. Certain report forms in California might be required where they're not required in another state. But they all have some type of form and they all have some type of identification. So, of course, to drive, you need to have a California driver's license, and in other states, you're going to need their state driver's license as well. And these are things that are to be presented to you as an officer when you're working traffic and somebody is stopped for whatever violation you're stopping them for. And then there's the traffic accident part of this, which, some officers love to work traffic and some really don't like to work traffic. It's not the most exciting thing. But again, enforcing traffic laws, you can really find a lot of, you can make a lot of good arrests. So part of your objective for this chapter is to be familiar with some of the questions that may need to be answered by, somebody driving a car. What do they have to answer? What don't they have to answer? How you might issue a traffic citation or how you might take a crash report. And we'll talk a little bit about DUI towards the end of this and what you're allowed to ask and what you're not allowed to ask. And then, just like anything else, understand the use of notes, or they use the term shorthand for the backside of a ticket. Some states have some blank boxes or lines on the back of a ticket where an officer can write comments. So and that's not always a bad thing because you might go to court 4 months later and you may not remember that traffic stop. So you can write yourself some little notes on the back of it. So that's always a good thing to do. And so this is a good reason for to enforce traffic. This was one of our brand new police cars that we had on the street for 2 days, and some drunk driver ran into it. So, even law enforcement can get hit by somebody that's intoxicated or impaired or looking at their phone or doing other things. But, the officer here was pretty lucky. There was no one in the passenger seat, thank goodness, and nobody in the back. So the officer was not injured. But again, it can look pretty ugly. So part of your textbook talks about community-oriented policing, and part of that whole concept of community policing involves positive community relationships. Because we've learned, or if you've taken a community policing class, that relationships between law enforcement and the community is really the cornerstone of you getting your work done. And really every action by law enforcement affects that relationship between the agency and the community. And the reason that they bring this up, and you're probably wondering, well, why are they going to bring that up in a traffic class? And we're going to talk about, writing tickets and DUIs and crash reports. Well, one of the major source of contacts between, officers and citizens aren't just like regular pedestrian stops, but it's traffic. You're going to make a lot of traffic stops in your career for a lot of different things. And because of that, you have and you're going to be more frequently interacting with individuals that you stop. And therefore you're going to have, an exchange with these people. And think about it. And you don't have to tell me, but if you've been stopped by law enforcement for a traffic violation, how happy were you? It was probably just the thrill of your life, right? Or, think about it when an officer pulls behind you. You're on the freeway and you see CHP and they come up behind you. And even if they don't pull you over, does it stress you out a little bit? It stresses me out. And, I'm, former law enforcement, so I still get kind of tense. So we do have to understand that people aren't going to be super pleased with you. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that we can't have a decent interaction with individuals. But, not everybody's going to be happy, and we know that. Typically, if we go by the numbers, traffic stops account for more than half of all the contacts between citizens and law enforcement every year. So that's a lot, because we see a lot of people that drive a lot of different, people drive, I'm not going to say crazy, but sometimes they drive a little bit fast. And because of that, you're going to have to decide, whether you're going to take some action or not. Please understand, though, that you do have discretion. So that's one thing about working traffic. You have discretion on whether or not to stop somebody, or if you do decide to stop them, whether or not to issue a citation. Maybe not everybody needs a ticket. So that will be totally up to you. And there's a couple of reports in here that I put in here. The one on the left is from 2008. The one on the right is from 2015, and it talks about contacts between the police and the public. So just kind of for you, just to know. And you do have an opportunity to positively impact a citizen's attitude toward police when you're talking to them. So that dialogue between you and the citizen should be polite, should be factual, and it should be based on the understanding that traffic safety is the goal of the contact, not just to write them a ticket so you can chuckle while you turn around and walk away. Because again, they're probably not going to be super pleased with getting pulled over. And then, a lot of officers actually develop kind of a very solid routine, on what they're going to say. And there's a big difference between, do you know why I pulled you over? License and registration. Versus, my name's Officer Farrar from Rialto Police Department. Ma'am, do you know why I pulled you over tonight? And that's an okay way to do it, because then you get them to kind of say, well, yeah, I was going a little bit fast. And then there's kind of the conversation breaker right there. So it's just, if you're a little bit more polite, a lot of times things are going to go at least a little bit better. Even if you do write them a citation, hopefully they'll kind of understand why. With that in mind, you really need to understand that there is no such thing as a routine traffic stop. If you ever hear that come out of somebody's mouth, they are completely incorrect, because you watch the news and all the videos and things just like I do. And from working in the business for as long as I have, we know that statistically traffic stops are dangerous, because you don't know who's in the car. You don't know what's in the car. You don't know what kind of mood they're in. You don't know if they're armed. You don't know if they're parolees. You don't know if they're probationers. You don't know if they're high. You don't know anything until you get up there. And that's when you start to find things out. So there is no such thing as a routine traffic stop. So just keep that in mind. And again, statistically, traffic stops are super dangerous. We encounter, again, impaired, that should be drivers, not rivers. That would be kind of hard to encounter a river. drugs, weapons, wanted fugitives, and more. And if you look at a lot of the videos that, I guess I'll use the word that it doesn't turn out great. The officer gets involved in some kind of scuffle or something like that. A lot of them are the result of a traffic stop where they have somebody get out of the car, or there's a wrestling match or something like that. So just kind of understand the importance of that. So always practice officer safety. Kind of assume a defensive posture, and without making it look too defensive. Typically, if you watch an officer walk up to a car, you'll almost always see them put their hand on their gun. Almost always. They don't always pull it out because it's just a traffic stop, but you might see them walk up and their hand might be very, very close. Sometimes that can make a driver nervous, especially at night. If it's super late and you got your spotlight on the back of the window so they can't really see you, and you're walking up, you're going to have your hand kind of there, and some people might take offense to that. So again, these are all just little tidbits that you kind of have to understand. So that's why calming things down right away, and using the yes ma'am, the yes sir, etc., being super polite will help. Let's see, I have something in the chat. I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. Let's see. How about when people say, I know my rights and refuse? Okay, so that's actually a good question. So here's the deal. To drive is a privilege. It's not a right. You don't have the right to drive. And when you receive your driver's license, whether you read it or not, there's paperwork that basically states that there are some things that you have to do. And one of them is to present a driver's license or some type of identification if you are operating a motor vehicle. And if you refuse to do that, technically it can be a misdemeanor and you can get arrested. It doesn't mean you have to do it all the time. Sometimes they'll want to talk to your supervisor, and you can have a supervisor come by and calm them down or whatever. But technically, if someone just will not sign a citation at all, and I have never had that happen. I mean, because really at the end of the day, you can tell them, ma'am, if you refuse to sign this, or sir, if you refuse to sign the citation, the law says that I have to take you immediately before a magistrate, which means that I'm going to handcuff you now, drive you to the courthouse, and take you in the court and put you up in front of a judge. Or understand that this citation is not admitting guilt, it's just a promise to appear. So those are some ways that you can kind of not get around that, but you'll figure out what to say. But that was actually a really good question. All right, let's see here. I clicked on that. Okay, so the primary objective for law enforcement, any law enforcement agency, for traffic, to write a ticket, to work traffic as we kind of call it, is the safe and orderly flow of traffic through their jurisdiction. So when you're working traffic, again, you're not there to get people. You're there to make sure that that the area is safe, and you're gonna render that area safe through some type of enforcement or warnings. You can pull people over and issue a warning. Some departments have written warnings. Anybody have an idea why they would want you to issue a warning in writing instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to give you a warning, see you later?
So there's documentation. If another officer pulls them over later, they don't just keep getting warning after warning after warning.
That's one good thought. That's good. Anybody think of anything else?
Seems more like official to the person you're pulling over. It might make more of an impact.
That's true, because you're going to get a piece of paper that's going to say warning. I actually got a warning taking my girls to a birthday party. And I'll tell you that story later, and it kind of freaked me out. But so that's another thing. There's one other thing in there, though. One other piece kind of still hanging out there. No one?
Is it maybe like you promising that you're not gonna do this certain thing again?
Mm, almost. So really what the rationale for a formal warning, kind of like it looks like a ticket, but it's they have a little box that says warning, etc., is to make sure that you're not profiling people and that the city does have some documentation on you pulling over cars. Because let me just say this. I mean, I'm very honest when I instruct. I've known officers that have been terminated because they were pulling over females in order to get dates. So that's all they would do, is they would just pull over women. And they would park down the street from, let's say, a bar. And when they would leave at night, they would pull them over. So this is another way to keep the officers kind of accountable on, if you're going to just issue, warnings, who are you issuing them to? Are they all the same gender? Are you just citing the males and not the females, or citing the females and not the males, etc.? Hopefully that kind of makes sense. So that's just another thing. So everything everyone said is right on target, but it's one mechanism for administration or supervision to make sure that we're not out there kind of doing things we're not supposed to be doing. And it accounts for your time as well. So that's kind of the other rationale for that. So, again, reason for working traffic, safe and orderly flow, making sure that, the traffic is flowing the way it should. And, agencies can kind of achieve this by, regulating the flow of traffic in diverse ways, which means traffic enforcement, or educating drivers, or even investigating, automobile crashes. The educating drivers, a lot of times even around Thanksgiving, if somebody actually signaled, I remember we would give out turkeys, or we would give out, certain little prizes if somebody actually did something correct when they were driving. So there's all different ways that you can do this, but traffic really is kind of an important element of law enforcement. Again, traffic stops account for more than half of all contacts between citizens and law enforcement across the nation, and the goal, is basically to make the violator aware of the violation, either through education or enforcement. So you can do one of the two. You're not there to lecture them and give them some 5-minute spiel on why they shouldn't speed, or what have you, but you can, again, you have the discretion to, of course, not write them a citation. You can give them a warning. If you have a written warning, you can give them that, or you can give them a little spiel, but it's not meant to be some long, drawn-out browbeating on why they were going, too fast. And then kind of lastly for this, just, everyone has kind of you will come up with your limit, if you will, how high the bar is going to go. So an example would be for speeding. Typically, I wouldn't write someone for unsafe speed unless they were going 10 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. That was my threshold. Because I'm not going to stop you for 3 miles over and go, hey, you were going 3 miles over. I mean, come on. There needs to be kind of a bar somewhere in there. And you'll find that as you kind of develop your own traffic expertise. But typically, 10 miles is that's a pretty decent sized chunk. So I'd probably pull you over, and then we would talk about whether or not you were going to get a ticket. We talked about discretion. You have that discretion. So you have you're given the right and the opportunity to act according to discretion when you stop people. Even arrest them. You don't have to arrest everybody. And even using force, you don't have to do that. You have a lot of different discretion. It's no different than, same thing with traffic. And the idea behind discretion is that the law should be a little bit flexible in some ways to ensure that the spirit of the law is satisfied. So the spirit of the law is, not really allowing someone to give an excuse, but maybe letting the person tell you why they Why didn't they signal? Why were they going too quick? Maybe they were going to visit someone in the hospital or whatever. I'm sure if you were stopped, you would probably want someone, an officer at least to allow you to say something, and that's typically why I used to say, ma'am, sir, do you know why I stopped you this evening? And they would, a lot of times they would say, yeah, I do. I was going too fast, or yeah, I kind of rolled through that stop sign. Okay. And then you could decide what you're going to do. So that's kind of the spirit of the law. The letter of the law is a little bit different. 55, stay alive. If you go over that, you get a ticket. And that's really, we don't like to really operate in that kind of environment if we can help it. So again, that's discretion. Traffic is also, it's also good for deterrence. So without going into the criminology background of deterrence, specific deterrence is basically, it's the, here for traffic, it would be the issuance of a ticket along with the punishment that's attached to it will hopefully prevent you from doing it again. So if I give you the speeding ticket and it costs you $380, we're hoping that you won't do that again. Now, the general deterrence kind of, side of that would be that society, other people may become aware of the punishment associated with that. So you ever drive by someone that's getting a ticket? And you kind of, and you don't have to tell me this, but you kind of looked over and you went, boy, sucks to be you. In your mind, right? You're kind of saying that. And that's the general deterrence thing. If you see people getting pulled over or someone getting pulled over, the thought is that because there's something bad that comes with that maybe you won't do it. Doesn't always work. Another example would be, have you ever driven like to one of these cities, whether it's Redlands or, Menifee or these places, and you see that law enforcement has parked a police car downtown, but there's nobody in the car? It's empty. It's just sitting there, and you kind of look, and it's not like parked because they're in there eating lunch. It's maybe parked out where people can see it. That's called deterrence. The hope is that when you see it, because you do this, whether you admit it or not, when you see a police car, what do? You typically slow down until you look and see there's no one in the police car, and then maybe then you might speed back up again. But you're gonna slow down first. That's another form of kind of general deterrence, that you're that there could be some punishment coming with that, so you're not going to do that. So that's another reason for working traffic. So let's talk a little bit about completing the ticket. Before you stop someone for a traffic violation, you should already know what you're going to do before the stop. Meaning, like, I know what the violation is. You can always look, if you don't remember the code exactly, a lot of officers carry a cheat sheet, so you can look it up if you need to. But you should already kind of know what you're going to do. Either you should be preparing to write the traffic ticket, or be prepared to give a verbal warning. You're not going to spend half an hour up there, at the window chit-chatting, but do remember that you have, again, discretion. Each state's a little different, remember, regarding the requirements for each section, but the concepts of completing a ticket is the same. Each state is also different when it comes to a driver's license. There's a lot of, shapes, designs, and the way that the information is formatted. So, make sure that you're, collecting accurate information and that you're not holding on to some kind of bogus looking driver's license. And we'll take a look at some of them too. And you can kind of tell a little bit. Each driver's license contains the same or some of the basic information: the person's name, their address, their driver's license number, typically a description. They're 5'10", 170, black over brown, meaning black hair, brown eyes, or, blonde over blue, or whatever it is. They'll have their birthday on there. They'll even have a special section for corrective lenses. So if you're supposed to be wearing glasses, you'll see there's a little corrective lens thing on there. So that's important to know too when you pull someone over and they don't have their glasses on. So, or restrictions. If you flip the license over, sometimes there's restrictions on that driver's license. Maybe they've had a DUI before and they can only drive to and from work or something like that. So you want to kind of look at the license to make sure that, what are the restrictions on there. But typically, again, the state license number, date the license was issued, the date the license expires. Most officers that I know, they never look for the expiration date. I don't know why. But the person could have an expired license. It's not that big of a deal, but you may want to inform them. I remember, I guess it's not that big of a thing. When I was the police chief, I forgot my birthday had passed and my license was expired. Yeah, so I had to tell my secretary, I'll be right back. I got to go to DMV. So I had to go, go spend the day at DMV and get and people do forget. And then you have to look at the class of driver's license. Are they riding a motorcycle? So do they have a motorcycle endorsement for that? Are they driving a big rig truck? So do they have a commercial endorsement? So, these are just little things for you to kind of look at. And it's typically all listed on the driver's license. We talked about glasses, again, their name, date of birth, address, all of that stuff should be on there. So here's an example of a California driver's license. Does anybody know what this little funky star is up in the upper right-hand corner up here? Nobody?
Is that for the real ID?
Yeah, there you go. So if you don't know, you should all have been at least received something in the mail or something via advertisement or something like that. But pretty soon they're going to want you to switch over to the real ID, and it's basically for air travel. So you don't have to, when you're flying between state to state, instead of a passport or just your driver's license, they're going to want this real ID. So the next time you get your license renewed, check into that real ID because there is some documentation that you have to bring in order to get it. And you can fill most of it out online before you go to DMV. So good job. So here's your driver's license number. Class C is for auto. So expiration, that would be when their license expired. So there'd be their name, their address, their date of birth, any restrictions. Here they have the little donor dot. So if you were working a fatal traffic collision or something like that, if they had the donor dot, then they would be or could be a donor. They would have their sex, their height, hair, weight, and hey, just so you know, guys do it too. Everybody lies right here. So, yeah, enough said on that. I even lied on mine because, yeah, whatever. And then their hair, and then they have the issue date, a signature, and that's typically what, kind of a California license. But they come in again. I know the textbook gave you some different ones. And the ones the textbook gave you are kind of, they're okay, but typically the same thing. It's going to have the state, your license number, the class. So again, I don't know what R is in Colorado, but height, weight, and these are things that you should look at when you're, pulling someone over. If nothing else on a traffic stop, at least look at the picture. If you don't look at anything else, look at the photo and make sure that it sort of resembles the person. Because people do have fake IDs and they try to kind of sneak it around you a little bit. So, just good information to know. So here's one from Arizona. Okay, so the textbook used the same picture. But sometimes, again, they're kind of formatted a little bit different. So the textbook gives you a couple of different ones. And they're Florida, the Sunshine State. Okay. So, again, make sure the address on there is correct. A lot of times when you're writing a citation, you can ask the person, sir, is this your current address? And they could tell you yes or no. If there's a need for a phone number, you can put it there if there's a box for it. Otherwise, you shouldn't be asking for somebody's phone number unless it's on a traffic collision, not a citation. If there's a box for employment on the ticket, you can ask. If there isn't, you shouldn't ask for it. But again, this is going to be, state to state on whether they ask for these things. Now, if it's a traffic collision, sure, you're going to want to get all of this information in there. But on a regular citation, you may not want to. You're going to ask for insurance because in California, you are supposed to drive with insurance. And an insurance card comes in different looks. Same thing though, it's got the policy, the vehicle. So this is my insurance card, just in case you're wondering. So it's got the expiration date, all the information. It doesn't have all of the policy info. You really don't need that. But this is typically what an insurance card would look like. And sometimes they might look a little bit different. But you can ask for insurance along with the person's license and their registration. Those are typically 3 things that you want to see when you are going to issue a traffic ticket or take a collision report. Always compare the registration that they give you to the vehicle that you're stopping, so they match, that it's not some other vehicle. And then typically your registration, unlike your insurance, a lot of times doesn't have the license plate. It only has the VIN number. So you can see that here. But the registration will not only have the VIN number, but it'll have the license plate as well. Okay, so that's over here. And then it's got the person's information right there. So remember, license and registration can be unique to each state. So you just have to kind of understand that. I mean, California, this is what California looks like. So, I mean, that's that insurance company, but registration typically looks the same. Always compare all your stuff together just to make sure that, you don't have to be over paranoid. Not everybody's driving a stolen car, but just make sure that some things match. Here's some examples from your textbook on what a registration would look like. I showed you the one from California. So same thing, typically has the same information. Here's one from Texas from your book, Florida. It's going to have the same thing. So traffic tickets, if you've never seen one, good for you. If you have seen one, chances are maybe you've been issued one, which is never the fun part of a traffic ticket. But just to give you kind of an example, here's one from the agency I worked at. It's got up at the top traffic, non-traffic, because you can be issued a citation for something non-traffic related. Or remember, some misdemeanors you can actually cite and release. So we'll talk more about that next week. Date of the violation, the time, you circle the day of the week. If there's a report that goes with it, you put the case number in there. The person's name, residence, city, just kind of all their horsepower, if you will. Commercial vehicle, their age, their date of birth, all their identifying information, their vehicle license plate number, the registration. So it's got all of this in here. And over here, it'll tell you commercial vehicle, or if they're driving a hazardous material vehicle. The registered owner, is it the same as the driver, or is it somebody different? Here's the violations. So if it's speeding, you would check, you could put, if it's correctable, you can put yes. If it's not correctable. So real quick, what would be a correctable offense? Do you think? A traffic related offense. Something that you could fix.
Broken tail light.
Yeah. So broken taillight. So, or here's a good one. Tinted windows. Ah, yeah. So, I mean, so if you pull someone over and they've got limo tint all around their whole car, So if you wanted to, again, you have discretion, but you could check correctable. You'd put the violation. It'd be an infraction. So you circle the little I, and that would be it. So, tinted windows, you put the violation and then the description. You just put tinted windows. And that means that they could actually get the ticket fixed. They could go to a law enforcement agency or CHP, have someone at the front counter, a police officer or someone that's allowed to do that. They can sign the back of the ticket. You can see right here, certificate of correction. So the violation, the signature of whoever corrected it, their badge number, the agency, and the date. And then you could, and some agencies charge like $10, maybe even 20 to get a sign off. And then you just turn it into court and you're done. If it's not correctable, you have to go to court. If you don't go to court, what happens?
Bench warrant?
Yes, you get a bench warrant. You get a warrant. And they're not, sometimes they mail you something. They're supposed to, but sometimes they don't. I've seen folks that we've pulled over and ran their license and they have a bench warrant and they had no idea. And I think I believe them that they just don't have any idea. So you want to make sure that, you appear in court or what have you. Oops. Here would be the speed. So, and if you needed to put a direction of travel, you could. The location of where this violation occurred, the weather conditions. Was there an accident involved? There's a little box right here that you check. And then you would sign here and that would be it. This citation, actually, there's like 3 or 4 copies. If you were to move one of these copies, there'd be a couple of lines where you could write a little narrative on the back. But this is typically what a ticket looks like. So that's kind of like, yeah. Now, you don't have to issue a citation. You can give a warning. If this were a warning, a lot of the tickets might have a special ticket that just says warning, or they'll have a box at the top. So, or if you don't have that, you can just give them a verbal warning. Hey, do me a favor, slow down, be safe, see you later. So you could do that as well. Again, some tickets, depending upon what agency you work for, they have some lines on the back where you can actually list why you stopped them. I think it's a little redundant, but you can. You can use shorthand if you want to write notes in that little area. But they gave you a couple of examples in your textbook of citations that have, a little where you can put a little narrative thing in there if you want. Most California tickets don't have a lot of that. Let's see. Here's a back of a ticket that's in your textbook that has a lot of lines on it. And again, all of this information, the reason I think it's a little redundant, it's not from California, but all of this is actually in or on the ticket. The speed, the location, the person's name, etc. But having a couple lines on the back of the ticket to say, the person was polite, or the person admitted that they did this, or the person said F you, or whatever they did, you can put that as a little notation in there. In larger departments, they actually have units that do traffic, typically motors. Motors are really good for traffic enforcement because they can kind of get in between other vehicles and kind of start and stop real quick and turn around really fast. So they don't quite have as much protection, of course, as a unit, as a police car would. But you'll see a lot of these larger departments have, pretty good size traffic divisions that have a lot of, motor officers assigned. Just because your agency might have a traffic division doesn't mean that you don't work traffic or you don't stop people or you don't take crash reports. But these larger agencies, a lot of the crash reports are handled by the traffic division. So that's kind of a good thing, especially if you don't like working traffic. One of the primary responsibilities that you'll have, again, responding to a traffic collision, is determining whether anybody's hurt. So now we're kind of looking at the crash report. We do the enforcement to hopefully eliminate the crashes, but a lot of times that doesn't work. Departments have policies on how to respond to traffic collisions. If they believe that there's an injury, they will allow you to roll what we call Code 3, which is lights and siren. But be aware that a lot of officers in the past have actually crashed themselves while responding Code 3 to a crash report. So it doesn't do anybody any good if you drive that fast where you can't get there safely. So it is important to remember that. And typically, when you would investigate one of these types of crashes, you do have to consider, it doesn't mean that it's going to be, but you always have to consider impairment. Sometimes it is just a crash. And you know, I don't like to use the word accident, but sometimes it can be. But you have to be aware enough to look for signs of any type of impairment or distraction. And distraction being, of course, looking down on your phone, texting and driving, you know, or drinking and driving, or etc. So these are all things that you have to at least look at to make sure that your investigation is thorough. When you actually write a crash report, it's going to be almost similar to a crime report. It's not going to be that much different. You're going to have a notification, unless you happen to observe the crash. It'll be on this date at this time, I received a call of a crash over here at this place. And when I got there, this is what I saw. So you'll have like a little observation. You know, you'll have the driver's, you know, that should be description, I believe, of what occurred. So you're going to have statements from driver 1 and driver 2, or driver 1, driver 2, driver 3. You might even have passenger statements or witness statements. So it's almost in the same format, if you will. Now, if there's a fatality or major injuries, they have, you know, the report's going to be a lot longer. But a basic report is going to be very, very similar in structure. Okay. Typically, vehicle 1 should be, you know, kind of the driver most responsible. And that's how California likes us to write the reports. So we always refer to driver 1 or vehicle 1 as that person that we believe was most responsible for the crash. And hopefully that kind of makes sense. And then I'll show you what a report looks like as well. So, and you're going to write a narrative. So you're going to have you'll have face pages, just like your crime incident face page, and you'll have a narrative. The only difference is the face page is going to say traffic collision, and it's going to have some forms. I know they have these in your textbook. I'm going to show you what they actually really look like. So this would be a state of California. Almost every agency in California uses this form. So this is the basic form. Traffic collision report is from the state of California. So Highway Patrol, this is, and it's the same, it's just formatted different. It's got the person's license number, their name, all their info on their driver's license, pretty much. Insurance, where it occurred, registration, make and model of the car. Here it says driver, pedestrian, parked vehicle, bicycle, or other. So if this person ran into this person, this would be driver 1, this would be driver 2. But you just click driver. And then same thing, driver. If this driver hit a pedestrian, this would be the driver, this would be the pedestrian. So almost like a crash report, right? But just a little bit formatted different. Same information. If you flip it on the back, this is where it gets a little more detailed, where you're going to put some information in here on who you believed caused the crash. So it might be number 1, which would be driver 1, they were speeding, so you would put the section for speeding in here. And then there's other things like, was it cloudy? Was it clear? Was it dark? Was it light? There's a lot of information that's to be collected in here. And it's not just for tracking purposes. A lot of times it's for insurance purposes on who was at fault. And if it's criminal in nature, it's going to be used as far as, the crime goes. So if the person was DUI, they're going to put in here that the person was under the influence. Okay. So it's always important. They have a separate witness or passenger, just like on your crime report, you have additional persons, witnesses, etc. Same thing here. Anyone that's injured goes on this form. Anyone that's a witness goes on this form. Were there any passengers in the car? That goes on this form. Just like a crime report, it just looks a little bit different. Here's your narrative. We have a narrative form for a crime report. So it's the same thing. It's where you would put in all your, your narrative. And I'll show you what a short narrative looks like. Actually, here it is right here. So this is a very short report. It's an actual report. Notification. On this day at this time, I went to this location because there was a, whatever happened. So it was a collision involving a vehicle which had fled the scene. Here's the scene description. He could have put observations if he wanted to. He describes the scene basically of the crash. He puts the vehicles. Party 1, because they left, they don't know who it is. Vehicle 1, this is all the description they got. The reason this is blacked out is because it's an actual person. So they have us redact it so you can't see it to be able to show it. But this was the other person involved. So party 1 is at fault because they're the most at fault. Party 2, this is their information. They found some evidence. So there were some skid marks. They also got some surveillance video. So that's actually good. So the officer looked for video. That's great because almost everybody has video. So sometimes you can catch that. He put in a little heading for hit and run because that's what happened. The person collided with the person and then fled. And then a statement from party 2. Then they put a little summary in here. The area of impact means this is where the crash occurred. And here's the cause. In your crime report, it would be recommendations, but here's the cause. Party 1 basically drove up on the sidewalk and crashed into party 2. And that's kind of what happened. So, a little different, but similar in some aspects to a crime report. So we're not going to get into a crash report yet, so don't worry about it. But this just kind of gives you, some information to kind of get you thinking. When you take a crash report, remember, sometimes you might issue a citation, you may not. You're going to want a driver's statement, a witness statement, whatever you see. You're going to list any injuries. You're going to take pictures, just like you would at a crime scene. You might even do a diagram, just like you might do a sketch at a crime scene. You're going to kind of tell where the vehicle was damaged, and then if any vehicles were towed away. If they tow away a car, this is the form they use, and you don't have to remember all this, but there's a lot of paperwork in working in law enforcement. If someone's car gets towed away, this is what they call a California CHP 180, and they fill out all this information, and then we tow your car. So that's what the back of this 180 is. So again, if you didn't think there was a lot of paperwork in policing, you're absolutely wrong. There's a lot of paperwork in there. So just, again, understand that. And this is stuff in your textbook, which it's okay. Some tips, and we're almost done for crash reports. Remember, determine if medical assistance is needed. Don't assume. So don't just, if there's no significant damage and there's not metal laying all over the place and glass, Can somebody hurt their neck from getting hit from behind? They can get like a whiplash, or you just don't know. The seatbelt can get kind of snug around their neck. So you're always going to want to ask, do you need any type of medical assistance? And if they say yes, then you call the paramedics. And if they say no, then you're okay. You're going to want to interview everybody at the scene, if possible, before you determine fault. Don't assume that you know who's at fault, because until you really get into the meat of an investigation, you could be wrong. So make sure that you get all of the facts before you determine who's at fault, because it's not just going to be documented on the crash report. If you're found at fault, what could happen? Besides getting a ticket, maybe, what else could happen? Okay, so sure, if it's negligent or something, you could get arrested. What else could happen?
You could be
I had two people at once.
Sorry.
Go ahead, try it again.
Go to court.
Well, you could have to go to court. What else?
they can see you.
You could get sued. And then the bottom line, what's the thing that nobody wants to have to happen here?
Insurance
You
go up.
get the price on the insurance.
Ah, Alec, you got it. Your insurance is going to go up. So you don't want to just arbitrarily, yeah, you know what, is at fault. You want to make sure you get all the facts, because nobody wants to have their insurance go up, because insurance is not cheap. So, these are all things that we have to consider. And then finally, make sure that the drivers aren't under the influence. You don't have to, not everybody has to get a field sobriety test that we're going to talk about in just a minute. But if you see something, just investigate it a little bit further. A lot of times it's very obvious, but a lot of times it may not be. And realistically, people can fall asleep and crash. They could just be too tired and literally fall asleep. They could be taking regular medication and have an adverse reaction. Somebody could have a medical emergency like a heart attack or a stroke and crash. So again, get all the facts before you determine who's going to be the one at fault. Look at your crash scene and see if it reflects what people are saying. And if it's almost like a regular investigation, make sure the story matches the crash scene. If they tell you, I was going really fast, but I saw the person walk out on the street and I slammed on my brakes. If somebody says that, what should you see in the street?
Skin marks.
Skid marks. If you don't see any skid marks, that story doesn't match up. So these are little things that you should really be thinking about. And then document injuries. It is important that you document. You're not a doctor, you're not an EMT, you're not a paramedic, but you can still, if you see some injuries, you need to document that. Okay, so really quick, before we move on, I wanted to kind of just hit on a couple other things with traffic, and then so here's a nice drunk driver. So besides this one, there's always this guy that ran over two of my police cars. Yeah, anyway. Working traffic is important. Just remember that traffic enforcement really is the most frequent contact between police and otherwise law-abiding citizens. So really, it really is important that you establish a good rapport with people when you're working traffic, okay? People like you when you're out there in the neighborhood stopping speeders and, reckless drivers and, people playing their music too loud as it, vibrates through their window and you can hear it like a half a mile away. But they don't really like you as much when it's them. So that's why you want to come up with, your routine on how you're going to talk to somebody. Okay. We've already talked about the primary goal of traffic enforcement. It's also, again, I'll say it again, it's one of the best crime fighting tools out there, working traffic, because you will find you'll run into a lot of people involved in criminal activity that are out there driving. And sometimes you might even be assigned to what they call selective enforcement, meaning that you're told to go to a certain area because of a certain type of, traffic issue, whether it's speeding, whether it's running red lights, whether it's whatever. That's more selective. Okay. So we'll kind of go through this in this presentation. I'm not going to go through all the stats, but really, I mean, there's a lot of crashes, a lot of fatalities. One thing that's kind of interesting is that criminals are 5 times more likely to be involved in a crash. Any ideas? Why would that statement, it sounds kind of funky, but why do you think that would be true?
Yeah, because they're under the influence.
Okay, so that's one. Typically, they could be under the influence.
Because this is like it's like a short story to me. So there was an event going on in my family, and then after we left that event, unfortunately one of our family members got into a car accident, and the person who crashed into our family member, she was under the influence, and they were accusing my family member of them crashing into her, but in reality she was like under something else.
And that happens. So we have under the influence. What else would be a reason?
Running from the law.
Say that again.
Running from the law.
Okay, so they could be trying to get away. So you see some pursuits, and pursuits can end pretty nasty sometimes. They can. So that could be another rationale on why they might be more likely to be involved in a crash. They could be in a stolen car, and the car's not them. They don't know how to drive it. They could be under the influence. They don't care that there's going to be any damage to the car because it's not their car if they're in a stolen car. I mean, so there's just, they tend to be a little bit more daring, if you will, and willing to do certain things. They might actually have something illegal in the car with them at the time. So there's just a lot of reasons that can kind of come up, which, end up having this kind of statement like that. One thing I did want to just cover really quick, and then we'll kind of move on to our writing assignment and we'll be done, is something that's called pretext stops. And this is important because you're going to run into this. So again, an important issue related to traffic or a traffic stop is basically the charge or the ability of using a stop as an excuse, right? To stop the vehicle for an unrelated reason. Okay. A lot of times people associate this pretext stop with kind of profiling. So here, the easiest example I can kind of give you is you're a patrol officer, you've worked the same beat for a while, and you've arrested a couple of drug dealers that you know that are involved in dealing. And you see that same car and the same guy driving down the street. They drive right in front of you. Now, your first thought in your head is going to be, that's Johnny Jones. He's the local drug dealer from down the street. He probably has drugs in his car. And now what's going to be your next thought? You're already thinking it. You might as well say it.
Does he have a weapon?
Okay, maybe. But what's your thought in your head since he's driving a car?
What can I stop him for?
Thank you, Alec. That's going to go in your mind. It's the local drug dealer. Drugs and guns go together. I've arrested him for sales before. He had a wad of money, a bunch of dope, a gun, blah, blah, blah. What can I stop him for? That's going to go through your head. And that's the kind of the basis of, or one basis for a pretext stop, or what we call a dual motive stop. And that's where you use a traffic stop as an excuse to execute another agenda. Your other agenda is exactly what Alex said. How can I stop him? Because once I stop him, maybe I can get into the car. And some of you are probably going right now in your head, well, you can't do that. Well, yeah, you sort of can to a certain point. So the question with a pretext stop is the temporary detention of a motorist who the police believe has committed a traffic violation constitutional under the Fourth Amendment, if the officer in fact had some other law enforcement objective. So if I follow this guy, we'll stick with your thing here, Alec. If I follow Johnny Jones, the known drug dealer, the guy that I really want to stop and get into his car because he has probably a bunch of stuff in there I want to get and arrest him. If I follow him for about a mile and he fails to signal when he changes lanes, is that an actual violation of the California Vehicle Code? The answer would be yes. Could I stop him? Yeah, if you're shaking your head, yes, you're on target. Now, my mind is still in the dual kind of motive, right? But did I have an actual violation of the law? Yes. Therefore, I can stop him. And what's kind of interesting, the court actually said in this case, this is Wren versus United States. It's not that old. It's 1996, so it's not too bad. It basically said this in a very similar case. The test for validity and constitutionality of a stop is not whether the officer would have made the stop, but rather whether the officers could have. And what that comes down to is if you have a lawful traffic violation, regardless of what your other motive is, the Supreme Court doesn't care. They just care whether you had a lawful reason to stop. Does that all make sense? It's controversial, but it's an actual Supreme Court case that says that you can have kind of a subsequent motive in your brain, but you still have to have a lawful reason to make a stop. And then after that, you still have to have probable cause to search, etc. But you can still make the stop. So anyways, I just thought that was kind of interesting to kind of put in there. We all know what racial profiling is. We know that that's completely illegal and that you can't do that. So you can stop based on the actions of people, not the people. So that's, we know that that's important. We're going to talk for just a few minutes about detecting impairment because our writing assignment for this week is a under the influence individual. So you're going to want to know what some indicators are. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I did this, I hope I did, your discussion board actually talks about 3 different field sobriety tests. And we'll talk about those briefly. Remember, for California, it's not a test question, but the legal limit is 0.08. So if you're 0.08 and above, you're considered to be under the influence, but you can still be impaired if you're lower than that. Okay, it's just, it's kind of an interesting thing. Texting and driving, just so you know, is almost as bad as drunk driving right now, as far as fatalities go. So again, if you have a crash and you don't see any items of impairment or alcohol or anything like that, you may want to inquire about whether the person was on their phone. So these are all things just for you to kind of consider. We already know that traffic stops are extremely dangerous. And then just to kind of let you know, for these larger traffic accidents, or not accidents, but collisions, if you will, they do have computerized systems now that actually can do really cool drawings these are for like fatal collisions or major injury collisions. But they can document, they can self-draw the intersections. They can actually animate it to where you can make a little animated video. So it's gone a long ways from just doing a little sketch. So there's a lot of information out there. Okay. So with that said, let's quickly look at our writing assignment for this week. Let me see, what did I do with it? Okay, here we go. So if we go back to our module, which I think, are we in 14? One more. There we go. Okay, so our writing assignment for this week is going to be a DUI. And the section, so I'm starting to, just so you can read it, you can click here, it'll take you to Find Law, which is actually a pretty good website. And this is the violation. So there's two sections to driving under the influence. There's the driving while impaired, which is the A section. The B section applies if you're 0.08 or higher. Okay. Here's the role. There's the police officer and the person in the car and his little buddy back there. I kind of gave you a little kind of synopsis on what's going to happen. And again, it's going to be pretty much the same thing as a crime report. There are two other things just for you to look at. You don't have to use them this time, but I just want you to know that they are available. The first is, let me go back to, I think it's under here. Okay. This is what they call a DUI worksheet form. Some agencies use these for notes. Some agencies have you attach it to your report. For this week, you don't need to attach it to the report unless you want to. So, and the reason they call it a DUI, kind of worksheet is it talks a little bit about, lighting and, the vehicle and passengers. But on the page over here, it lists the different tests that you can give to someone, and different states do it differently. Here they have what they call the standardized tests. One of them is called nystagmus, and it's really hard for me to describe other than the smooth pursuit of your eyes. When we're done tonight, I'm going to post a link to a little 4-minute video on nystagmus so you can watch it. And you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. It's the ability for you to track with your eyes, follow an object like a pin or someone's finger. And as you get over to the corner, if somebody is intoxicated, especially with alcohol, you'll see their eye bounce. That's called nystagmus. If you're not impaired, typically your eyes won't do that. They'll just follow nice and smooth. That's called the nystagmus test. Okay? They have a kind of walk and turn, or maybe you've heard walk the line. So they'll have somebody walk, take 5 steps up, turn around and take 5 steps back. And you watch them to see if they go heel to toe, or whether they fall down or miss a step, or they take 10 steps instead of 5. So those are things like that. And then the last one is the one leg stand, where somebody stands kind of at attention and they lift up their foot about 4 inches off the ground, and you have them hold that for about 15 to 20 seconds. Those are kind of standardized tests. Now, they have other tests. Be careful of the test that you choose, because there's a good chance that you may have to actually demonstrate this test in a court trial. And if you can't do it, don't do that test to the person. And maybe you're all smarter than me, but I can't do the alphabet backwards. I'm sorry. I could if you give me a half an hour, so I can go all the way from A to Z and stop, and then go back and back and back and forth. It would take me 30 minutes to do it. So don't tell somebody, okay, your next test is to recite the alphabet backwards. You probably can't do that. Or I've seen a lot of people do the finger count, and that's where they take your fingers like this, if you can see, and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you can't do that, don't give somebody that test. You want to be able to at least perform it basically and be able to explain it. They have the finger to nose, which is where they have you stand kind of at attention and you bring your finger in and touch your nose. That one's okay. A lot of agencies you'll see that do that. But typically, they stick to these three. Typically. Sheriff's Department has the same kind of form. So that was Riverside Sheriff. Here's San Bernardino County. And they do, they have the eyes. So the Sheriff's Department does what they call the Romberg test. So they throw in kind of a little curveball. This is where you have somebody stand at attention, tip their head back and close their eyes. And you tell them to estimate 30 seconds. When they think 30 seconds is up, they open their eyes and tell you. Typically, an intoxicated person will stand there for like 3 minutes and then finally either fall over or open their eyes and go, okay. And it's been 3 minutes, which means that they can't really judge time well. So again, there's a lot of different tests. They have the walk and turn test as well. So some of them are similar, some of them are different. They have a little diagram for finger to nose. So I just wanted to show you those because they are out there. Here though, just so you can see, and I can make this a little bigger and we'll almost be done. This is an actual DUI report, okay? It's on a crime report or an incident report. This is an example from Rialto. It's the same thing as a regular crime report, right? You're going to put in the information here. The offense would be A and B, okay? Because this is the 0.08%. The victim for a DUI is actually the state of California, unless they crash into somebody. Your suspect, and this is redacted because it's an actual DUI report, so this way you can't see the name, but it's just like if it was a regular crime, right? Same thing, here's your page 2. You already have the offense on the first page. The property here that the officer booked is they took a blood test to determine their level of alcohol. So they booked this blood test kit. So that would be the evidence. The vehicle, this is the car that the person was driving. So, and then your narrative. Pretty similar to what you've already been doing. The assignment on this day, this officer right here was working. He was driving in a certain location. He was dispatched to this location, Jack in the Box, for the report of a male subject who wouldn't leave the drive-thru. So basically, the car's in the drive-thru line and the driver's passed out. So that's the assignment or notification. You could use that. Here's what the officer saw when he got there. He gets there. He sees this car parked at this place. He gets behind the vehicle. This is redacted because it's the suspect's name. He pulled behind the vehicle, approached the driver's side. He contacted the driver, and he was identified by his license. Here's the investigation. Instead of a crime scene, when he gets to the car, he recognizes the strong odor of an alcoholic beverage. And you'll learn how to use the words because you're not going to be able to say, when I approached the car, I smelled Budweiser beer emitting from... You don't know what that is. So all you can really rely on is if you've ever smelled alcohol or an alcoholic beverage, that's how you say it. It'd be the same thing if you smelled marijuana. You smell the odor of what you believe to be marijuana coming out of the vehicle. Here, he recognizes the odor of an alcoholic beverage coming out of the car. Then he talks to the driver who appeared, and this is where he starts to look at the driver. He was looking at his cell phone. This guy here, he was trying to call Jack in the Box corporate office at 4:15 in the morning. So you can tell that something's not quite right. As funny as that kind of sounds, right? His face was flushed. His verbal response was delayed. His speech was slow, thick, slurred. all signs of some type of intoxication, right? So here he tries to do a couple more things. And then this is the difference between a regular crime report and a DUI report. Now he's going to have to give some of these tests as part of his investigation, right? And you can pick the 3 tests that you want to give. Or if the person's too intoxicated, maybe you can't give them a test because they can't perform it, right? If somebody gets out of the car and falls on the ground, well, there goes the test. You probably won't be able to offer those. You can still take a blood test, or they can give a breath test. But so the officer does the test. The first one he does is the horizontal gaze nystagmus. It's not that much, right? It's a little paragraph. He does the 1-leg stand. He does the walk and turn. It just so happens that this officer had what they call a PAS device with him. But this guy basically wouldn't blow into the PAS device, so he couldn't get a read on it. So based on everything he saw, he arrested this guy. And then he basically gave the guy a blood test, or had a blood sample taken. Here's the evidence. Here's the dispo. Person was arrested and taken to West Valley. Now, because this is your first one, I know it seems complicated and you're probably all stressed out. I'm going to post this report with the video of nystagmus on one condition. Don't copy the report. Read it, use it as a reference, and watch the video, okay? And then all together, but this will help you. And again, if you don't want to do the walk and turn, you want to do the finger to nose, if that's what you see on the video, you can do that. This is just to kind of help you reference it. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? But what I don't want to see is a word-for-word copy on there to where it looks exactly the same. Use your own words, but use this report as a guide to help you so you don't get lost in all that stuff. Remember, I'll be online on Wednesday. So if you need to pop in on Wednesday, usually I'm lonely because people don't tend to come to office hours. But if you need help, you can pop in and I can help you. Does this kind of make sense to everybody? Okay. So again, it's the same thing. It's the same report that you've already done. It's the same crime report, incident report face page. It's a narrative. It just has a couple of twists. And the twists are you being able to describe what you see about the person's symptoms on the video. And if you need to add a couple just to make it cool, you can. You don't have to. And then you're going to give the person some tests, unless the video has the person falling out of the car and you can't give any tests. So that's going to wrap us up. We are really early, which is good. Does anybody have any other questions before we kind of are done? Fernando, you got a raised hand. Go ahead.
Hey, Professor. It's just on the interview assignment. Could I possibly interview my other professor, Favero?
If he will let you, sure.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Is this document under the links?
Yeah, so the DUI worksheets, if you want to do it, if you want to do one of the worksheets, you can. You don't have to. If you want to be spectacular and just go for the gusto and do that one, you can. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. I just wanted you to know that some agencies use this for notes and some actually have you attach it to the report. But the crime face page is the same one that we've been using all along, and it's in the forms, along with both the Sheriff's Department and the Riverside Sheriff's Department DUI forms. So they're both there. Is that what you were asking me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
I did have one question.
Sure.
In the rival
portion, they talked about when there's a crash and there's multiples in a car and you fill out the report. I kind of got confused on how they were saying victim 1 or person 1, person 2, person 3, because there was a question where we had to put people, number them in the car. Can you explain that a little bit?
Dumb.
It was like all clumped together, and I kind of was getting all confused.
I had to draw a diagram for that.
Yeah, is there like an easier way to kind of just explain that really quick?
A lot of officers, or you would use. So if vehicle 1, so the party that's most at fault is always driver 1 or vehicle 1. So you have a vehicle 1 and a driver 1. Now you could also have P1, which would be passenger 1, P2, P3, and then you could have driver 2, right? Vehicle 2, passenger 2, passenger 3, so you could do it like that. That way you know who goes in each vehicle. That's the easiest way to do it. And again, I know that the textbook, especially in the Revel thing, sometimes they're not always California based on what they're doing. So that's just to kind of give you a different look. So don't panic on the Revel stuff. I'm happy that you're doing it, and I hope you're getting something from it. I mean, I've gone through it, and I think some of it's pretty good, and some of it is a little bit kind of Eastern, if you will, versus more Western, kind of how we tend to do it out here. But the easiest way is to do it by, by vehicle. So, you have driver 1, you could have P1, passenger 1, P2, passenger. You could do it like that. Or if you don't want to just use P1, you could say passenger 1. You could actually spell out passenger if you want, but you don't have to.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. Anybody else for the good of the order tonight?
So I just have one more question.
Okay.
I know you probably answered it, but I'm just a little bit more confused. So the other page, the instant report that we've been doing, is that the only page that we are submitting with also the additional papers of the sorority test? And
So
then this one that's on the screen right now is just an extra one if you want to do it?
Right. So all you need to do for this particular assignment is you're going to need the crime incident page, which is the one you've always been doing. It's got I would use the full one because it's got the face page, on the front. It's got the evidence on the back, because if you take a blood sample, you're going to book that and you want to list the car. So you just need that and the narrative. If you want to do it, you can fill out one of these DUI forms, but you don't have to. I just want you to know that they exist. Some departments use them as just notes for the officer to kind of write down so they can remember when they write their report. Some departments have you actually fill it out and attach it with your report. But just to make it simple, you don't have to do it. You just need the crime report face pages and the narrative. That's all you need for this week, but you can do this if you want to be cool.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Any